Well, we're picking up today back in Matthew chapter 9, and we're going to do just a little bit of a rewind because I didn't get completely through Jesus calling Matthew, so I know we're somewhere around verse 12, but I'm just going to take it back to 9 so that you kind of get a little bit of a refresher. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but for sinners." So we talked last week about the difference between Matthew and Levi. We talked a little bit about how tax collectors worked, how they collected over and above. We talked a little bit about how Matthew's job really would be kind of the equivalent of sitting outside of Walmart and collecting sales tax. All right, you ever get bothered or bugged or aggravated because you have to show the receipt as you walk out the door? Could you imagine if you had to show the receipt and pay the sales tax then? If there was a checkout line after the checkout line, it would not be popular, would it? And then especially to have it be a checkout line after a checkout line, and you know that money would go to a foreign occupier. Now you really grind your gears when you go by. But that was Matthew's job, was to look at the carts going by and to tax the carts based on how many wheel axles they had, to tax them based on what was in the cart, to tax it based on how many employees were following behind you. All of these things were Matthew's job. And I want you to realize right off the bat, Jesus goes, he invites him. At that point, the disciples have kind of got to be going, him? The outsider? The betrayer? The traitor? And I'm sure, no, that's Judas later. No, I'm kidding. But really, to the Jews, you couldn't pick anybody more unsuited for the role of a rabbi. And yet, Jesus says, "Follow me," and Matthew is so excited. "Jesus, can I throw a party? Jesus, I am so excited to meet you. I want my friends to meet you." Well, a tax collector who isn't allowed into the synagogues, who isn't permitted to touch the holy books, and who would be, rabbis would throw stones at them sort of deal. What kind of friends do you think he has? Tax collector friends. And I want you to realize there's a distinction there, right? "And behold, many tax collectors and sinners." Okay, now is he saying that tax collectors aren't sinners? No, in English we kind of would take that as mutually exclusive, right? You are either this or that. Or the way it's meant by the Pharisees is you've heard of the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is the bad and the ugly. All right? This is what that, okay? You have the tax collectors and the sinners. All right? You have the really bad, can't even go to the temple, sort of, can't belong to anything. The blackballed, blacklisted, them, and then the sinners. All right? If you ever wonder what's lower than a sinner, to a Pharisee, it's a tax collector. Because at least a sinner can be covered in Passover blood. At least a sinner can be atoned for. But a tax collector, man, that just feeds the fires of hell. And that's what Jesus goes and he sits down. And the Pharisees saw this. And they said to his disciples, and I think it's interesting, they don't go to the man himself. They're probably standing outside the door looking in, because I'm not going to step into such an unclean place. And I said last week we were going to talk a little bit about table fellowship. In Middle Eastern culture, all right, sitting down and having a meal with somebody is a big deal. You don't eat with those you don't trust. You don't eat without those you are not celebrating. If you sit down and have a meal with somebody, it is a sign that you are in agreement. It is a sign that you are under the laws of hospitality, taking responsibility for this person. And you are saying, they are one of us. And that's powerful. You know, just stop and think about that when you come up for communion a little bit later. Given and shed for you. You're under my roof. You're under my house. You're under my protection. Let me meet your needs. Let me sacrifice. Let me go without. But you as the guest will always have the best. And Matthew thinks he's doing that for Jesus. What he doesn't realize is Jesus is beginning the process of doing that for him. But the Pharisees take note. And they need answers. Jesus, we don't get it. You're a great man. You're a holy man. Some are going to say, John pointed to you. How can you be better than John? And John said, that's the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. John said, I've got to decrease so he can increase. How can you be one sent from God? And you hang out and touch a leper. And you're lifting up a woman. And you're talking to Gentiles. And now you're talking to those who would betray their inheritance and their birthright, and they would side with the Romans over your own people. How could you? You can almost hear him. I'm very disappointed in you, Jesus. And Jesus comes back with, those who are well have no need of a physician. Healthy people don't go to the doctors. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came to the righteous to call the righteous. Or I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. I'll get there. You see what Jesus is saying, all right? I came to lift up those who are hurting. I came to bring hope to the hopeless. I came to set the captive free. And in verse 13, you see Jesus references a whole bunch of Old Testament thoughts there. He goes to Hosea 6, 5, and 6. He goes to Isaiah 6:10 and 53, 5. He spends time in Jeremiah 3:22 and 8:22. All of these verses say the same thing. That you think you're righteous. And it's a misguided thought. That you think your sacrifices make you right with God, but there is not a single action you can do that God is going to look at and go, I want him on my team. or she's my all-star. That it's not about what you do or done, but it's done only through Jesus Christ. And again and again and again, he will confront the Pharisees with this and ask the simple question, do you see yourself as sick? It's some of the things that we do here. Why do we do confession and absolution? Why do we have to dwell on the whole I'm a poor, miserable sinner thing? Because the minute you stop remembering where you came from, you will no longer care about where you're going. And when you stop caring about where you're going, you have problems because you're drifting. We don't do that to beat you up and remind you you're a poor, miserable sinner and you should just count yourself lucky to be breathing today. We do it to remind you that your sin had a cost. And that would drive you to despair if you didn't also know that your joy and hope comes from the fact that there is a God that loved you enough to pay that bill. That there is a God that loved you enough to see you through. But he's not just taking questions from the Pharisees. Because you pick up at verse 14, then the disciples of John came to him. Okay, Jesus, we're out here in the wilderness with John. You're in here having parties with sinners. Lucy, you have some splaining to do. Then the disciples of John came to him saying, why do we and the Pharisees, see which team they're on? Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but you and your disciples do not fast? And Jesus said to them, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and they will fast. No one puts on a piece of unshrunk cloth upon an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. Neither is new wine put into an old wineskin. If it is, the skin bursts, and the wine is spilled, and the skin is destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. You see what they're doing? John the Baptist comes in, and his disciples say, okay, Jesus, why are you different? And I will tell you what, I think that is an important question for us to strive to hit. You want to know you're doing Christianity right? When the world walks up to you and says, why are you different? You're doing your faith in a way it stands out. Why are you different? Why do you have more liberty than we do? We're out there with John and we're eating locust and honey, surrounded by righteous people. All right, I'm kind of tired of bug tacos. Why are you here living it up with the sinners? John said you were called to be better than this. No, we're fasting. You're not. And here is some of what they forgot. According to Leviticus 16 and 23, do you know when they were required to fast? Yom Kippur. 1 day a year. But by the time you get to Isaiah 58, and even when Jesus says, you remember those Pharisees, they put the makeup on their face and they fast multiple times a week and they stand in the market and they look miserable because they want you to see what they're doing and go, oh, I just want to be like that holy man there. By then, Jesus goes, you're fasting. And it's not bad to fast. But when you make a fasting an action you do to prove you're more righteous than your neighbor, that's not what it's about. Jesus says you don't go to a wedding and act like you're at a funeral. All right, it doesn't matter how many jokes we make, as the groomsmen and all of that. Oh man, dead man walking. I've done enough weddings. I've heard them all. There goes another one. All right? You don't go to a wedding and weep for what's happening. You don't mourn the loss of your friend that day or things like that. You celebrate. This is what we've been counting down to. This is what it's all about. And a wedding's a huge deal. Remember, Jesus went to a wedding feast to start his ministry. Remember, it's a multiple day, 7-day feast. It was the best week of your life. You were waited on hand and foot. It might be the only vacation you got because life or death was on the line the rest of the year. You didn't get weekends off. Party. He goes even more than that. It's something new. Something that's never been done is happening here. Jesus goes, I didn't come to throw a patch over the old system. I didn't come to do a better sacrifice for you. I came to be the sacrifice for you. I came to be new wine, and you don't pour new wine into an old bottle. You see, wine needs to ferment, which means it releases gases, which means it expands. If you put wine into a wineskin, new wine into a new wineskin, why? Because new wineskins are stretchy. They're made out of leather. All right, actually, they're made out of other parts of the animal, but we're going to save your stomach there. All right, when they're fresh, guess what? It stretches. When it's no longer fresh, guess what? It don't stretch anymore. It cracks. So the first time you put new wine in, the wine's going to release gas and the wineskin's going to stretch. It's a win-win. But if you put new wine into something that's already stretched out, it needs to expand. It can't expand anymore. It ruptures. You have now lost a well-used wineskin that's been broken in and that new wine you were going to have. Oh, travesty. But it's senseless. It doesn't make sense. It's silly. Like when my son thought that he could sneak pop into his water bottle. All right? Yeah, and he's running with it. And then he opens that zipper top of his water bottle. All right? Made a mess. It was funny to watch. Not so much fun to clean. But it made a mess. That's what Jesus is saying here. Look. I'm here. He goes, there's going to be a time that I'm not, and they're going to weep. And he's even going to be more obvious later, but for now, if the bride and the groom are at the party, you celebrate. And that's what my disciples are doing. And then it goes on to talk about the celebration he's going to provide in one of the most interesting sections of this chapter. While he was saying these things, do you realize how quickly this is? Jesus has met Matthew, gone to a party, dealt with the Pharisees, turned around, dealt with the disciples of John, and then while he was saying these things, he's not getting a break. While he was saying these things, behold, a ruler came in. We know this is Jairus from the other Gospels, an influential man of the synagogue. And he says, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, "If only I touch his garment, I will be made well." And Jesus turned and seeing her, he said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose, and the report of this went through all the district. Matthew condenses a lot into this. You get a lot from the other Gospels that you put in. Matthew's goal is not to cover the whole account. Luke does that. Matthew's goal is to hit the highlights because he wants to show you from his view all the things he does to show he's the Son of God. But you get this tragic story. A girl, 12-year-old girl, is dead, dying, really. You get the full account, and it's in the middle of this all. Can you imagine that, Father? I need to hurry, and I need to get Jesus. Jesus, will you come? Let's go. And he is taking Jesus through the crowd, and he gets, by Jairus' accounting, distracted. Really, Jesus, you're going to stop in the middle of the crowd and deal with this other woman? Tell her to wait her turn. You're going to stop in the middle of the crowd and say, "Who touched me?" Tell her to wait her turn and understand her faith. Now, I want you to understand, you have a 12-year-old girl who's dying, dead by the time Jesus gets there. She's never made it to adulthood. You have a woman who has bled for 12 years. You think there's a little bit of a comparison being done between these two? She's unclean. She's got to sit in a different section of the temple. For 12 years, she hasn't been allowed in the inner courts. For 12 years, she has struggled with this identity. If she's running through this problem, do you know what they probably have never done for her? Arranged a marriage. She can't bear children. She can't continue a family. She's, in the other accounts, it says she has seen and exhausted her funds trying to find a doctor who will help her. She knows she's unclean. She can't be touched. She's slinking through the crowds. I can't go near him. I don't deserve to be near him. But if I just touch his cloak. Now, there's a fun word here. I've taught it before, but I'll teach it again tonight. I know it says cloak. And I say cloak, and you all think, his poncho or his blanket or his robe. But the word that's actually used is his tzitzit. Okay? It's a fun word. It means tassel. Jewish men had tassels off the bottom of the robe. These 4 tassels marked them as a Jew, marked which tribe they came from, and it marked their lineage. All right? So I want you to realize, she said, if I could just touch where he came from, I can be healed. That's what she reaches out to. And in the middle of it all, Jesus, it says, sensed the power going out from him. And he stops the conversation to say, who touched me. At that moment, the disciples are kind of like, well, we got to keep going. Come on. This is Jairus. He's probably going to be a big donator someday. This is great PR. Let's go. And you're going to stop for her? First off, how do you know who touched you? And second of all, why? She probably thought she was about to be hauled to the principal's office because she did something she wasn't supposed to do. This is a rabbi. She's a woman. She just broke about a dozen social codes. And yet Jesus turns around and he acknowledges her. He sees her. He addresses her. He looks at her and says, where you are in your life, what you're going through matters. I see it. I acknowledge it. Take heart. Your faith has made you well. Your audacity has made you well. The desire that you have to bring your anxiety, to cast your cares on Him, means He turns around. Those who humble themselves before the Lord are the ones He lifts up. If you're going to ask, Lord, we don't understand, what do you mean you came for the sick? All right? When you're sick enough to go to a doctor, you expect things to change. And so too do you see that here. And then Jesus finally moves on from there and gets to Jairus' house. And the girl is dead. And Jairus is distraught. And I love these verses that happen next. That he gets there, and the professional mourners are gathering out front. It means everybody's accepted. It's over. The funeral preparations have kicked into high gear. All right? In the Hebrew culture, when somebody dies, the body needs to be in the ground before sundown. You're not permitted to check the body into a funeral home and leave it there for a while. There's no embalming. There's no undertakers, all right? You put the body on the litter, you carry it out, you have professional mourners who wail the whole way. The more noise that's made, the more they're loved. And they scream all the way to the grave. That's happening. That's what they're getting ready for. And Jesus gets up there. And I want you to hear his word. Now, too often, when we read Jesus' words, we make them angry. All right? Better the man not be born than betray the Son of God. Okay? I really think Jesus was lamenting. He'd rather have not made Judas than have Judas condemned. But that's another, we'll get there. Here, Jesus is angry. Go away. Why are you here profiting off of death? You're a professional mourner? You're going to make your living celebrating what's abhorrent to God? No. Get out of here. It's not her time yet. The girl's not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. Man, I don't want to be the one who gets up to heaven and gets before the seat of judgment and there's a video of me laughing at Jesus. But they laughed. But there's also this old saying that he who laughs last laughs best. And that's what you see here. Jesus goes and he took her and he raised her just as he will you. He who laughs last, laughs best. That's what Christ was sent for. Do you see how all of this ties in? How I said Matthew writes thematically, not chronologically, that Matthew writes to make a point. All of these things tie into those verses that you just read about those who are well have no need for a physician, and those who are sick do. Go and learn what it means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He is showing mercy here. It continues. As Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying out loud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." This is the first time in Matthew somebody acknowledges him as the Son of David. When he entered the house, again he goes into the house. The blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, be it done for you." And their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went away and spread his fame through all the district. Again, not always so good at following directions, are we? And yet, how could they not? Changed my life. I once was blind, but now I see. Jesus heals a man unable to speak. As they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled. Never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, "He casts out demons by the prince of demons." And Matthew again is putting a contrast here of what Jesus came for versus what the Pharisees, who should have been the shepherds, thought. He came for tax collectors and sinners. Well, which one are you? And do you realize how sick you are? And Jesus went through all of the cities and villages. That's important. He didn't leave any spot off the map. All right? Jesus didn't say, "That town's history I don't like, that town's history I do," or "That's a better town than that one," or "They're better believers." He went to all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. Literally, he was moved. Literally, he just looked at them and wept because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to the disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out the laborers into his harvest." Whose harvest? His harvest. Every person you meet when you walk out this door is part of his planting. Are you going to help water it? Are you going to help tend it? Jesus is moved by the people. He didn't come to parade how better he was. He came to proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God, that there is something better. Jesus didn't see the people, the sinners, but as sheep. And he sees them as his children. And he was so moved by compassion that upon a cross, he purchased and won them from sin, death, and the devil. And that's important, because this whole chapter, we've been talking about what Jesus believed, to what Jesus does, to hear why Jesus came. He came for the sick. He came for the sinner. He's the prodigal's father that runs out. He's the good shepherd that leaves the 99 behind. And he rejoices whenever one is found. But the laborers are few. Ooh, maybe that's the Lord telling me it's a good time to stop there. The laborers are few, but guess what? Next week we're going to meet the 12 disciples. And they're going to be sent into the field. And we're going to see how their labors go. But that's next week.